And welcome back to the First and Goal podcast. My name is Lewis, and next to me, as always, is my co-host Laraib. As we're super excited to head into Super Bowl weekend, we are a week away, about a week and a half away. But Laraib, we wanted to take this episode to get into some of the big news surrounding the rest of the NFL. We've been so invested into this season, this postseason, and what's going on with the teams that are still in it to win it, because that's all that really matters at this point. But there's been a lot of big things going down in the NFL, just news wise, new hirings, firings, retirements, big things to cover, Laura, including the breaking news today. Let's just hop right into it. But before we hop into anything, I wanted to say that during these next 2 weeks, we really want to invite guests on to do Super Bowl picks, Super Bowl previews, just talk about the NFL. So if you want to hop on our podcast, just hit me or Laraib up. Put your comments down below. We read all of our comments. So if you want to get on, just let us know, and we will try to get you on because we want as much awesome picks and content for this Super Bowl week. We're super excited for the matchup, and we'll be doing our official picks next Thursday. That's when you will see them, the Thursday before the Super Bowl. But Laraib, let's go ahead and get into the biggest elephant in the room, the pain in our neck for our entire football watching lives, and basically my entire life. He's been in the NFL. Tom Brady officially announces his retirement, although after last year and his retirement, we're kind of skeptical on whether or not he's actually retiring. Rob, seeing this today, is Tom Brady actually retiring?
Is he actually retired? I'm going to go ahead, Lewis, and I'm going to say no. Now, this was another one of those retirements just right out of the blue. Same exact date as last year, Lewis. But last time he retired, he still had a family, right? He still had a wife that he was married to. And he was still connected to the Buccaneers, Lewis. But now the family is missing. He's not connected to the team. He can go anywhere he likes. And, just think about his psyche, Lewis, just to think about the type of guy that he is, to go out losing to the Dallas Cowboys in the wild card round. I just don't think that's going to be him. And now there's a couple teams out on the market. We'll talk about this a little bit later about who can go to potentially a San Francisco. Maybe I really like, maybe running back with the Bucs with a different head coach. There's a lot of different options for him, Lewis, but for to think he's officially retired, maybe I just haven't comprehended it yet. Maybe it's just a second time around and I'm just, I just don't believe it. But I think that Thomas Patrick Edward Brady Jr. will be on an NFL team next season.
I do not think so, Laura. I just think that with the kind of suddenness of this information, of this news, I think this is I think this is more of a football thing than a family thing, because obviously that's not playing much of a point in this part of Tom Brady's life. But I think, going out the way he did, it's just, he's asking himself, is it really worth it? Because we saw how it was in Tampa. I mean, he wasn't really, he can't escape, obviously. He's never been that great on his feet. But you look at the quarterbacks in the NFL now, we have Jalen Hurts versus Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. Two amazing, rushing quarterbacks. Mahomes, not really a rushing quarterback, but a really good escape artist and get out of the pocket and do things with his legs. I mean, that's the NFL. Joe Burrow was in the conference championship along with who the Eagles play, or Brock Purdy. He could move around, but you had a complex running a game with him. Some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL are being able to get out of the pocket because it makes your offense so much more dynamic. Now, Tom Brady's arm is still amazing. Don't get that mistaken. He still has a great arm. And I mean, it's not great like it was maybe 10 years ago, but he's so cerebral. He still has the mind for the game, obviously. But I think he saw in that playoff series, or that playoff game against the Cowboys, was just like, if he can't run the ball, if he can't get any help play action wise, he is not effective enough as an athlete at this stage of his career to extend plays against a super fast, hyper athletic defense. And you just have to keep doing these checkdowns. That's why you saw him break his completions record. It wasn't because he was wheeling and dealing all around the field. It was all these checkdowns because they couldn't get the running game going to Leonard Fournette, Chris Godwin, just down in the middle, 3-yard gains. And it really, it's just not sustainable. So I think the way the video was, he was just on a beach. It was peaceful. It seemed like, I have to get this off my chest. He probably viewed the market, and there's not really much out there for him. You can say San Francisco would be the best fit, but they still have Trey Lance, who they have a lot of capital towards. And I know Brock Purdy, he tore his UCL in that game against the Eagles. He's going to be out 6 months, but he'll probably be back for the start of next season. And do
Actually,
you
Lewis,
really
we
want
have
to take
breaking news on that. Brock Purdy, it will not be ready. Will miss the entire 2023 NFL season.
really? He's going
Yes,
to be out
that
for an entire
he will
year?
be out for the whole year.
Wow, it must be Tommy John surgery then, which a lot of people did suspect that he would require. So that's all right. Well, that does change some things because Kyle Shanahan said in an interview or after the post game, he said that Jimmy Garoppolo is not coming back to San Francisco. So is Josh Johnson really going to be your backup plan? And that's the thing that's alluring about Tom Brady to San Francisco, because before the Brock Purdy injury, you seemed like, all right, we're going to run it back with these two. And if Lance gets injured or something like that happens, we know Purdy's the type of guy, or Purdy would have just won the starting job in camp and he would have just ran with him. But it just seems like the biggest problem with Kyle Shanahan's offense in the past years have just been quarterback injuries. They have all the rest of the talent. This is a win now roster. And Tom Brady's best attribute is he never gets injured. He just plays a smart brand of football. So maybe he was in contact with San Francisco. Maybe, it's just too expensive for them. They have a lot of capital invested in Lance. Want to give him a full year. But what I was going to say, my main point about Tom Brady was I think he's done with the Bucs. I think that's for certain. I think you agree with that as well. He's done. Todd Bowles just really wouldn't work. They fired Byron Leftwich as the OC. They're like maybe bringing back Kellen Moore as the OC, but obviously he took the job in the Chargers. So I think what could potentially happen, Laraib, is a really good team during the season loses their starting quarterback. Tom Brady will definitely receive a call. Now, if he's, out of shape, I think he's a guy who's going to stay in shape, stay in football shape just for the potential of something like that happening. But is he the type of guy to kind of just be a mercenary at this stage of his career? He has this illustrious career, so many accomplishments. So you really think to yourself, is he going to be just a hired gun nowadays, going to different teams like a Matt Ryan or something like that, go out like that? I don't see that. So the only team that I could see him going to and succeeding in would be the 49ers. So it's pretty much just up to that. But, I mean, the Raiders didn't really make much sense. Their offensive line isn't really that good. Some other teams like the Jets, I just don't think he would do that. So, I don't know. I think Tom Brady is done. He's retired. I just think how everything ended last year is such a fiasco. He wanted to make this short video, just addressing all of his fans, everything else like that. We'll definitely see something in the next few weeks, like if he signs a one-day contract or something with the Patriots just to retire as a Patriot or something in that nature. We'll see what happens. But in my opinion, I think Tom Brady is finally done for his career.
Well, Lewis, I think we can both agree, even if he's not on a football team, this is not going to be the last we see of Tom Brady. Of
No.
course, he has a lot of deals. A lot of guys going to be coming at him from Fox, ESPN.
No, he already signed the deal with Fox.
Right.
Multi-million-dollar deal.
So this is definitely not going to be the last of that anybody sees with Tom Brady, as much as we hate him or dislike him, however much troubles he's given our teams.
I don't mind him off the football field. Just on the football field is where he caused me all my problems.
Right. And if he goes to the 49ers, man, it's going to be another roller coaster of a season for my Seahawks, having to play Tom Brady twice a year. Yeah, but if we look at some of his stats, looks like you mentioned, highest completion percent, or not completion percentage, but completions and attempts in his career. Also for his yards, it's still a top 10 year on passing yards in his career. And of course, the only thing that was really down, Lewis, was the touchdowns and his quarterback rating. But I still think if he goes into a system like the 49ers, he can still excel in that, Lewis. But, moving on from Tom Brady, we also had some big coaching changes, Lewis. I know specifically your former head coach, Sean Payton, is now with the Denver Broncos. Now, you guys got a nice haul from that, a first-round pick and a second-round pick. So, how do you feel about that as a Saints fan? Sean Payton retired from your team, and now you're still able to get some assets back from him. Did you ever think that Sean Payton would come back to the Saints? And how do you feel about, the haul that you guys got for trading him?
Yeah, I mean, to address your first question, I didn't think he would come back to the Saints. It seemed pretty final. I thought if he wouldn't accept another job, he would just stay at Fox, just because it's not that he just, didn't like the front office. He was best friends with Mickey Loomis. There was a report that came out like a month ago where Sean Payton would consider it, but considering that him and Dennis Allen are really close, he really respects Dennis, and he doesn't want to like come back into the picture. Which why, Peyton? Why? But whatever. I didn't think he would come back to the Saints, and I do like the haul. Don't get me wrong. A first round pick and a second round pick is great for any competition, especially a guy who wasn't even on the team last year. So as a Saints fan, I am happy with what we got because I think that's probably the best offer that was remaining on the table. Some of the jobs, some of the other jobs already got taken over, that which we'll talk about later. But I think just for the Saints fans' perspective, it's sad to see him go coach another team, obviously, because you really felt like this would be a lifelong thing. But I mean, he's a guy that, brought us a lot of success, a lot of, he brought us the championship in my lifetime, which, we can both say we said that. We saw that in our lifetimes, a championship for our teams. And, it's hard. It's hard to win. So the fact he did that, he did so much for the city, so much for this organization. So I'm never going to have any ill will towards Sean Payton. I wish him success. I'm happy that he's actually going to an AFC West team. So we're not going to have to play him that often. So I hope they succeed. But if we play them in the Super Bowl next year, then hey, I'll be rooting for my team. Certainly, that's never going to happen. But Laraib, I want to ask you, because obviously you have connections with Russell Wilson. You watched him for years, and we both agree that last year was completely awful, horrendous. But we talked throughout the season that we didn't think this was over for Russ. He still has the talent, and we saw kind of late in the season he had some flashes after they fired Hackett of him putting up decent games, but it was too little too late and they didn't win some of those games. But at least he was, putting up some of his normal stat lines, nothing spectacular, but it seemed like he was kind of figuring it out. And you saw guys like Jerry Jeudy starting to get really involved in the offense. What does Sean Payton change for this offense? And can Russell Wilson get back to what we know him as?
But what can Sean Payton change in this offense? He can change everything, Lewis. Coaching Drew Brees, a Hall of Fame quarterback, and just dominating on offense with him was it just a sight to see, Lewis. And I'm not a Saints fan, but I grew up in New Orleans, and Drew Brees, in my opinion, is statistically one of the best quarterbacks, maybe the best quarterback that I've ever seen. Tom Brady is the GOAT, of course, but when I watched Drew Brees, he's just something who just blew me off the page whenever I saw him. I just couldn't witness what I was believing when I watched Drew Brees play football. And now Sean Payton coached him in that system. And even when Drew Brees went down with some of those injuries, Lewis, and you saw guys like Teddy Bridgewater come in, Taysom Hill come in and replace him for, just those couple of games, this offense was still, functioning at a high level. The Saints were winning a lot of games. Teddy Bridgewater was undefeated as a starter, right, when he was with the New Orleans Saints for a couple of years. And so now you have Russell Wilson, who's only 34 years old, Lewis. A lot of guys, or you'll see a lot of public opinion about how this era of quarterback is over, right? You see, Aaron Rodgers towards the latter is, almost done. Tom Brady just retired. Matt Stafford is, weaning off a little bit. Ben Roethlisberger is gone. Drew Brees is gone. But Russell Wilson, Lewis, is only 34 years old. I think he still has, a couple years left in his prime, at least one or two before he starts to, fall off even more than he did this season. But with Sean Payton in, with those two receivers and Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton, I think this team is going to really transform. Now on the defensive side of the ball, of course, they're going to have to keep up some of the great performances that they had. They kind of just broke off towards the end of the season. When the offense started to heat up, the defense really fell off, Lewis, which was unfortunate. But with Sean Payton in the building, I think it's going to bring a completely different dynamic to this team.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully they can keep Edro. I forgot his last name, but the defensive coordinator they had, because he did a really good job, and it doesn't seem like he has any other job opportunities. So if Sean Payton can keep him off staff, keep that familiarity with the defense, he did a really good job with his defense last year. Obviously, number one scoring defense in the league. You just so happen to have an awful offense. So for my time watching Sean Payton, it's like, well, what does Sean Payton bring? Why are we giving up a first round pick for Sean Payton? What value does he bring that some, offensive lineman from Iowa can't bring us? All right, well, listen here, Broncos fans. Sean Payton is a great leader. He's definitely going to establish a sense of authority. He's not going to be flustered in big moments and just bring a sense of just sound stability in the building, which is a far cry from what you had last year with Hackett, who's had to hire a guy to help him with game management, which is the number one, role for a head coach. And I mean, Hackett might be a good offensive play caller, coordinator, but he's nowhere near the pedigree that Sean Payton is. So the biggest attribute is Sean Payton's leadership and his stability in these type of games where it's close. You can have someone to lean on. He is your guy. But in terms of offensive creation, he's been probably the best, if not the second best offensive coach of my lifetime. With between him and Andy Reid. You can throw guys like Shanahan or McVay in there as well, but they haven't done it over a period of time where Sean Payton had 6 straight years with Drew Brees with the number one offense. And those other years when he didn't have number one, it was number 2 or number 3 or in the top 5 every single year when he was with Drew Brees. And the thing about Russell Wilson is he's similar to Drew Brees in the sense of a kind of shorter quarterback, stockier. And I think Sean Payton can bring over some of the Drew Brees things to Russell Wilson. Because what's Russell Wilson's biggest weakness? For me, it's his lack of trusting the middle of the field. Because he's shorter, he can't see over the offensive lineman. He just doesn't trust throwing in the middle of the field. He prefers the outside boundary shots or getting out of the pocket and making plays. Sean is going to try to, and the thing about Drew had the same problems, but he was so well prepared all the time that he can anticipate windows opening before they even happen. So if Sean can, walk Russell Wilson through, and he's a great quarterback, obviously, but he's obviously had some attitude problems, not attitude in a sense, but kind of arrogance around him with his own office, demanding things of the team. I think he's going to humble him because in my opinion, Sean Payton has a bigger pedigree, especially in that building now, than Russell Wilson. The thing last year was Russell Wilson was the big dog. He was the big prize. Now, after that last season and bringing in Sean Payton, his notch in that building has fallen a lot more. So if he's willing to learn from Sean Payton, then I think this offense can do a lot of really good things. You can use a guy like Javonte Williams Sean Payton loves using pass catchers out of the backfield. Obviously Alvin Kamara, Darren Sproles, Pierre Thomas. There's so many instances of this and where the offense has been successful. And we've seen Russell Wilson have success with this in the past with pass catching running backs. So if he can get that set up along with a strong running game, which in his opening press conference, he said, we need to be able to run the ball. And Saints fans every single year would be so mad in the draft when, another first round pick on an offensive lineman. That's not going to be fun. That's not going to be flashy. That's not going to, win me my fantasy league. Well, that doesn't matter. That's what wins you games. Because in the best years of Drew Brees and Sean Payton is when we had a strong running game and a great offensive line. You already have a good left tackle there and Garrett Bowles, who, recently got paid. So you have him locked up. And if you can bring in some offensive linemen for us and really have them trusting in an offensive line and a running game, that will do wonders for this offense. Because as you know, the best years in Seattle with Russ were when you had a dominant running game with like Marshawn Lynch. And so you didn't have to rely on Russell's arm so much where he'd kind of fall off towards the end of the year and where it'd be like, oh, Russ for MVP, let Russ cook. And then towards the end of the year, it's like, oh, wow, Russ is just kind of mid now. And what are we going to do? And people will get just mad at Pete Carroll and whoever the offensive coordinator was there for a long time. So it's like, all right, well, what are we going to do with Russ? Sean Payton wants to establish the running the ball. He's definitely going to humble Russ. I think that's going to work. I don't know how well it's going to work. I'm not saying that all of a sudden they're going to win the AFC West over Mahomes and the Chiefs or, Jay Fraudbert and the Chargers. But, I mean, this is definitely a great hire. I don't know what the contract details are, but, it took a long time for them to get this figured out when he probably should have been hired about a month ago. But it's probably a $20 million contract for a coach, which is definitely steep. So the Broncos said, if we're going to make Russell Wilson work, we're going to swing for the fences, get the best guy we can, and we don't care about the price tag. We need to fix this mistake, Laraib. So, I mean, what do you think about what I just said?
No, I have to agree with you on all fronts. And the number one thing about Sean Payton, like you mentioned, is just his creativity on the offensive side of the ball. So if you can fix some of those, mental mistakes that Wilson has, like you said, get that run game going with Javonte Williams, because it was such a big hit once he got down with the injury. Lewis's offense was anemic from that point. Of course, Melvin Gordon, he's a great number 2, but he has his own problems and looks like he won't be back in Denver.
No.
Just with the issues that they had. And so we'll see what this team can do, Lewis, next season. And, the big thing was I was hoping Sean Payton would go to my Chargers after that disappointing playoff loss, but they decided to keep their head coach for some reason. So, of course, Denver gets him. But Lewis, we got a couple of other coaching hires to talk about. We have Frank Reich to the Carolina Panthers. Now, you and I agreed, he's a really solid coach, and he really shouldn't have been let go by the Colts in the middle of the season. Of course, they benched Matt Ryan, they put in Sam Ehlinger, and of course they're going to lose games by a bunch of points and just get steamrolled. And then, of course, once they fire him and they bring in Jeff Saturday, it's all right, Matt Ryan, you can come back in. I mean, that was just ridiculous. But now he's in Carolina, another young defense over there for him to coach. And of course, they got a good draft pick, so hopefully they get a good quarterback. And I really like what this team can do next season, Lewis.
Yeah, as a team in their division, I'm pretty. I don't like the hire because I think it's a good hire. I really like Frank Reich and all the reasons you just brought up. I think Frank Reich was always just dealt a really raw deal in Indianapolis, where it was just a rotating door of quarterbacks every single year. He couldn't cultivate a guy, couldn't develop a guy, which we know is his kind of strength. So when you bring in guys, and the guys he brought in had very good statistical seasons. When Andrew Luck was there, hold up, I'm going through it. Andrew Luck had his best numbers, but then Andrew Luck retired. And then you bring in a guy like Phillip Rivers, the few years beforehand,
they went to the playoffs, Lewis, with Phillip Rivers.
Yeah. And he, like, in the past few years was in San Diego, then Los Angeles, he was throwing a lot of picks. He was inconsistent. It just kind of seemed like he was on his way out. But then he only threw I think it was 8 picks that season, and he had the highest completion percentage of his entire career in that season. And then Phillip Rivers retires, so you bring in Carson Wentz, and laugh all you want, but he was very effective in Indianapolis outside of one really bad game down in Jacksonville, which everyone remembers that for. But he was extremely effective there. And we saw the drop off when you got rid of Carson Wentz in the offense, and he was left with a anemic Matt Ryan, who he tried to get the most out of, but Matt Ryan just could not do anything in this stage of his career. And then, like you said, Jim Irsay was screaming at him, put Ehlinger in. I can't watch this anymore. He puts Ehlinger in. Ehlinger sucks because, of course, and he gets fired. And then, the rest is history. So I do like this for Frank Reich. The only thing is you can't keep that cycle going in Carolina. David Tepper, he's an aggressive owner. He's a new owner, and he's willing to spend a lot of money. But you don't want this rotating door of quarterbacks. Like, I don't want them to bring in a Derek Carr or something like that. What they should do is they need to focus on this draft, find their guy in this draft, whether it be Stroud, Young, or Levis, Anthony Richardson, a guy like that. And they need to cultivate him, have Frank Reich develop him for a long time. And I'm not saying, there's a big debate on bringing in a bridge quarterback to help out. I don't think that's going to work unless you keep a guy like, maybe keep Darnold there on a cheap contract just as like an insurance policy, because Darnold was still pretty effective. But obviously you want to develop a guy for the future. You want a guy on the back burner who's learning, and you can have him as a future franchise guy, which I think there are potential franchise guys here in the draft. So I think that Frank Reich will be effective. I've always liked his offensive system. But I will say, I really hope for Carolina's sake that they can keep Steve Wilkes in the building, because he did a really good job, in my opinion, and the latter half of that season when he took over for Matt Rule. Just kind of like the players loved him. The defense was really, really good after he took over as the head coach. So if they can keep him in the building as a defensive coordinator, that would be huge for this team, and just the morale of the players with Frank Reich in there. They could build something special. And now with Brady gone, the Saints suck, and the Falcons are there's nothing really going for them. They could really do some damage in this division next year and potentially win it if they figure out the quarterback position, Laraib. So that's a very exciting future for this Panthers team.
Yeah, and with the number 9 overall pick, like you mentioned, there's a lot of young guys that can get in this draft for Frank Reich to develop, and it looks like they might be the team to beat now in the NFC South Division, Lewis. But a couple other hires we can talk about. D'Amico Ryans, a 49ers defensive coordinator who led the number 1 defense this year, is now with the Houston Texans, Lewis. And so, I think this is a really, really good hire. A lot of teams, like the Houston Texans, they rotate coaches. The quarterback situation has not been good over there. But now bringing in a guy who can, build a solid defense, build something for that, build a nice unit for that team, and then they can figure out all the stuff with, what they're going to do with their picks and everything. But starting off with a solid defense and a great defensive coordinator, Lewis, I really like this move. And, the ownership here has been up and down, of course, with the Deshaun Watson situation and how that all, ended up. But DeMeco Ryans, I think, a great hire. And he has the opportunity to change, the culture over here in Houston. And, of course, a guy who formerly played for the Texans. So, he has a lot of connections around here. And it's going to be awesome to see what he can do in this division, especially, facing a Trevor Lawrence who's still pretty young. This Colts team, we don't know what they're going to do. And, of course, the Titans with, Tannehill being banged up often. Derrick Henry looks like he might be, coming down just a little bit. So I think this division is wide open, Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about DeMeco for a second, I think, with the Houston ties, it seems like a really good match. And like you said, I actually thought this Houston's defense was pretty good last season. They ranked like 21st, but given the circumstance where they were always on the field, they're always put in really bad positions on the field because of their offense turning the ball over. I think they have some really good playmakers in the front seven, just some young talent. And, Derek Stingley, you drafted him first overall, and you're going to get some extra assets in the draft. And I think with that second overall pick, if you really don't love a quarterback, there are some studs on that defensive prospects, like a Jalen Carter or a Will Anderson, that will be available for you. And if you get like some stud defensive guys, bring in a serviceable offense, and then they sign him to a 6-year deal. And I'm really hoping that the ownership doesn't fire him after a bad season, because I don't think any Houston fans, I mean, you live in Houston, they would probably riot if that happened. I would riot. I'm not even a Houston fan. But I think if he starts to turn this defense around, get some young, good pieces in there, and they start building it up, and then next year you have some really exciting quarterback prospects, namely a Caleb Williams and a Drake May out of UNC. Some guys who could be really exciting next year if you don't like the guys this year, obviously with the number 2 overall pick, and you have another first-round pick as the number 12. So you could really boost up that defense, put in your scheme, because I think he's just a really smart guy. He deserves a ton of credit for what he did in San Francisco. And what he did was he utilized the strengths of his players. Because Talanoa Hufanga, we didn't know who that was last season. He was on the 49ers. We didn't know who he was. But he then puts him in more of a box safety where he's, tackling, he's going after the quarterback, kind of like a Jamal Adams role. And he was a first-team All-Pro. He just puts guys in the right positions where they have their strengths. And we saw this season with Derek Stingley, unlike a Gardner or a Woolen, he wouldn't really follow any receivers. They just played a zone coverage, and he would just sit in the flat. I mean, you don't use a top 5 pick on a corner for him not to shadow and play a lot of man. So I think he's going to figure out the defense, and they might have a top 10, 15 defense next year, and that's the perfect building blocks for a successful team going forward. So I really, really love this hire, Laraib. But let's move on to the other 2 teams that are still without a head coach. We still have the Cardinals and the Indianapolis Colts, who we just mentioned, have not hired anyone yet, Laraib. Is there anything that, if you're a head coach, Laraib, and I'm pitching Arizona or the Colts, which of these jobs is more attractive to you?
Lewis, am going to pick the Indianapolis Colts.
Wow.
They have a really solid block starting roster on defense that I really like. I know Stephon Gilmore is, he's going to retire in a couple of years, but I still like a couple of young guys that they have in Shaq Leonard, who's only been in the league for a couple of years.
Yeah.
The big thing I know you're going to say, Lewis, is going to be Jim Irsay.
Yes.
It's just how that ownership is really bad. But you flip over to Arizona, Lewis, I don't think their ownership is, maybe it's not as bad, but maybe it's not. Actually, I don't know anything about Arizona ownership.
Okay, the big thing over there is Michael Bidwell.
The big thing in Arizona is, in my opinion, Kyler Murray. Now, we've seen him and Cliff Kingsbury have their, a lot of different, back and forth arguments. And of course, Cliff Kingsbury's gone, and you've seen a lot of, commitment issues out of Kyler Murray. And I just how, of course, he's a little bit of a shorter quarterback, Lewis. He's a runner, so that's also a positive for him. But I think for this Colts, you have a lot more to work with. I know, Jonathan Taylor is a nice young piece, along with Michael Pittman Jr. The offensive line needs to be built, Lewis, and there's a spot to be filled at quarterback that I think a coach would like to develop. Like you said, Frank Reich, one of those guys who can, go into Carolina and develop a quarterback if they draft one. Indianapolis is another spot. You have to deal with Jim Irsay, but if you can go in there and you can draft a guy that you like at the number 1 pick and develop him, I really like that versus Arizona, which has a really bad defense, Lewis. Of course, they have DeAndre Hopkins and James Conner and Kyler Murray, but just the dysfunction that they've had over there, I think I like the Colts just a little bit more.
Well, you mentioned it. I disagree with you because of Jim Irsay. I just think if he, we were trying to think, oh wow, what's the Cardinals owner? I don't even know who he is. I don't know anything about him. That's probably a good thing, because he does the owner stuff and he leaves all the other football operations, which I know haven't been going well, obviously, but to the guys who know football. So if I'm a coach and there's an owner who's not really tampering, hey, you do your thing. We're hiring you. We trust you. We're giving you all this money to build this team how you want to build it, then I feel more empowered to make decisions and to get my staff together and build a team with the faith and the ownership with me. With a guy like Jim Irsay constantly breathing down my neck, telling me I want Ellinger in, Matt Ryan can't do it anymore. It would be so toxic of an environment. He's always been like this, and unlike a Jerry Jones, where at least he's kind of funny, Jim Irsay just seems kind of miserable all the time. And I think that's the number one thing for a coach is you want trust and a relationship with the ownership because that's your boss. That's the person who, if you have a bad season on your first year, they won't just fire you like we saw in Houston with their ownership. So you really hope that, with a guy like Michael Bidwill, he has fired coaches. He maybe held Cliff Kingsbury on for a little too long in that system. But I mean, you mentioned the rosters. You say Kyler, his apathetic attitude at times can be kind of toxic, but he's still an insanely talented quarterback. Now, he's not going to be ready for the start of next season. Probably around the middle of the season. He wants to make sure he's 100% healthy. And I think that's a good move for him because of how valuable he is to this franchise. So as a coach, you're inheriting a top 10 quarterback talent. And if you're that guy, that's an exciting prospect because if you have the quarterback figured out, and we know Murray has the talent, and if you can just instill an attitude in him, that's obviously easier said than done, but that's better than whatever the Colts situation is. Coaches last with quarterbacks because that's what makes you successful is a quarterback. Now, I think they need to hire an offensive coach who I thought Sean Payton would have been perfect for this team just because he would have been the big dog in the room and Kyler wouldn't be able to get away with a lot of the stuff that people think he gets away with. But if you're not going to hire a surefire offensive mind, then you need a kick-ass defensive mind, drill army sergeant type of guy to just whip this team in shape. And the problem with this roster is, like you said, they're an old aging roster with some guys on pretty expensive expiring deals. But you can build that. They have draft capital at the number 3 pick. So there's a lot, to look forward to in Arizona. Plus, I mean, yeah, you have the easier division in Indianapolis with the AFC South, but I just think they're not really doing anything for me with the quarterback position. The skill positions really aren't that great. And then this defense, they're an aging defense with a lot of injury-prone players. Shaq Leonard, injury-prone. DeForest Buckner is injury-prone as well. And the offensive line, which we praised for being so good the last few years, was really bad this year. And Quentin Nelson wasn't really himself either. So you need to build that unit. There's just a lot of stuff you need to build up where you also have to focus on a quarterback. In Arizona, there's also stuff you need to build up, but you have your quarterback. So that's why I think it's more admirable. I really don't like either of these jobs, but I would prefer the Cardinals because of ownership and the quarterback situation. But there's a reason why there hasn't been a coach hired in these positions yet, Laraib. Anything else you want to say on any of the other opportunities open at the moment?
Yeah, well, none that's open. I want to talk a little bit quick about Nat Hackett, Lewis, former Denver Broncos head coach, is now the offensive coordinator for the Jets, Lewis. And now this kind of paves the way for Aaron Rodgers to make his way over to New York. So, how do you feel about that? Of course, Nat Hackett, he has a really great connection with Aaron Rodgers. He was the offensive coordinator when he was back-to-back MVP, Lewis. And now they're in New York. The Jets had a really solid defense last year. And I think they're only going to get better, of course, with Robert Saleh, a defensive-minded head coach. The guys like Quentin Williams are really good. Sauce Gardner, of course, was all-pro this year as a rookie. And so, how do you feel about the prospect of someone like Aaron Rodgers moving from Wisconsin all the way to the Big Apple?
I think it's really exciting just for entertainment purposes. I mean, that's so hilarious. Him going from his little corner of the world where he can just mouth off and talk back and be a punk. Now you're going to the big city with the big lights. Everything you do, who you're talking to, every celebrity you're going to be with is going to be on the front page of the Big Apple News, and there's nowhere to hide in that city, and I think it's going to be hilarious. Now, fit-wise, obviously the Jets need a quarterback, and they have a really good roster that you could feasibly say they're a quarterback away. You know, I think Aaron Rodgers is better than Zach Wilson and Mike White. I guess that's just me. But there also is the commitment to a $50 million guy. But I think the hiring of Nat Hackett as the offensive coordinator, which he got a lot of blame for what happened in Denver, and he honestly deserved a lot of it. But as a coordinator, he's actually not that bad at his job. In his previous stints, I don't know exactly where he was, but I was listening to a podcast talking about it. He actually was a pretty solid coordinator who was highly regarded in a lot of positions for his play calling. So I think, he has definitely some credibility in this role. It's not like they're hiring him just for the Rodgers piece, but they're hiring him just for the Rodgers piece. They obviously, this hiring does indicate to you, because there were other coordinators, offensive coordinators on the market that I do like better. But this hiring indicates that they are in the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes. So it seems like they won't care about a $50 million price tag, and they will trade for whatever they need to do to get Aaron Rodgers to be a New York Jet and kind of change that franchise around. Shades to Brett Favre. It's kind of creepy how their careers really parallel one another in Green Bay. So I think the fit's really nice. I like a lot of the offensive skill position pieces there. A fully healthy Jets offensive line has potential to be very, very scary. Plus, they have some draft capital that they can use to move on to get in Aaron Rodgers, who honestly, I don't even think is going to fetch that high of a price on the open market in terms of picks and capital given up, just because of that massive contract and how he didn't really play that well this season. But it's ultimately up to the Packers and what they want to do, because getting rid of Aaron Rodgers kind of punts away any chances of really seriously being a contender, unless you think Jordan Love is that guy. And we don't know. We just haven't seen Jordan Love enough. There's been sample size that have looked good and have looked mediocre. I don't know. If you believe in him, that's what this offseason will tell me. If they move off of Aaron Rodgers, they must have faith in Jordan Love that he can step in as that guy for the franchise, which I don't think he is. So I don't think they will move off of Aaron Rodgers. I think the Jets might settle for a guy like Derek Carr in the open market, or another one of those quarterbacks, especially with the Brady news coming in that he's not going to come back. There's going to be a lot more teams desperate for any type of veteran quarterbacks to come in and save a franchise potentially. So we'll see what happens with these teams.
Yeah, we kind of saw this thing last year. I know this wasn't 100% confirmed, but the Broncos, it kind of looked like they brought in Nat Hackett as head coach to maybe, lure in Aaron Rodgers over there to Denver. And now if the Jets try to do this same old stint, of course, Nat Hackett not being in as the head coach, but as an offensive coordinator, we'll see if that works for this Jets team, Lewis. But I think that will wrap it up for this episode of the First and Goal podcast. Of course, we talked a lot of different things about the, of course, Aaron Rodgers moving somewhere. Tom Brady retiring. Sean Payton won this, that Denver Broncos won that Sean Payton sweepstakes. But of course, Super Bowl week is coming up. Of course, we have the Pro Bowl skills show tomorrow on Thursday. I hope everybody's going to be watching that. And of course, we have the flag football tournament on Sunday. So, Lewis, this is going to be the First and Goal podcast signing off. Peace.